Well, welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Obani. Here's what's coming up on the program. Germany's conservative leader Friedrich Merz wins parliamentary vote to become Chancellor. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. Plus, it's the eve of the papal conclave, kickstarting the process of electing a new pope. Let's begin The World Today. I begin with politics in Germany, where conservative leader Friedrich Merz has won a parliamentary vote to become the country's next chancellor at the second attempt. Merz had initially fallen 6 votes short of the absolute majority he needed on this morning, a significant blow to his prestige and an unprecedented failure in post-war German history. As it was a secret ballot at the 630-seat Bundestag, there was no indication who had refused to back him, either MPs from his centre-left coalition partner or his own conservatives. After hours of uncertainty in the Bundestag, the parties and the president of the Bundestag agreed to hold a second vote, which Merz then won with 325 votes, a majority of 9. His coalition with the Social Democrats should have had enough seats in Parliament from the start, but it appears 18 MPs who had been expected to back him dissented during the first vote. There was a prevailing mood of confusion in the Parliament in the hours after the vote. Under Germany's constitution, there is no limit to how many votes can be held, but in practice, another defeat for Merz would have been a headache for his Christian Democrats, its sister party, the Christian Social Union, and their partner, the Social Democrats. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected at the White House any moment now for his first official visit as Prime Minister. Relations between him and U.S. President Donald Trump have been frayed over Trump's tariffs. The U.S. President has not made things easier by repeatedly threatening to make Canada a 51st state, something Mark Carney has said will never happen. Joining Carney on his visit to Washington are 3 key cabinet members: International Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, and Public Safety Minister David McGuinty. Analysts say this meeting could be an early indication of where things stand on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement as well. That agreement between the 3 countries is meant to govern their relations with each other. But the Canadian Prime Minister is resolute. The Canadians elected a new government to stand up to President Trump and build a strong economy. To the Middle East now, as the Israeli military confirms it fully disabled Yemen's main airport in the capital Sana'a, which is controlled by the Houthis. Today's strikes targeted 3 civilian planes, the departure halls, the runway, and a military airbase. The Houthis have vowed to respond. The attack comes 2 days after the Iran-backed Houthis fired a missile that landed near Israel's main airport, forcing it to close briefly. On Monday, Israel responded by striking the Yemeni port city of Hodeidah. Israel has launched several rounds of strikes against the Houthis in Yemen, including the targeting of a power plant and ports in January. It previously attacked Sana'a airport in December. The Israel Defense Forces said it attacked flight runways, aircraft and infrastructure at the airport. It alleged the Houthis were using the airport to transfer weapons and operatives. And while those airstrikes hit Sana'a, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was seen overseeing the Israeli Air Force strikes on the targets in Yemen on Monday evening. This video captures Netanyahu at the Air Force Command Center in the Ministry of Defense, along with Defense Minister Israel Katz, Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, and several high-ranking military officials. The Israeli military confirmed it had struck terror targets belonging to the Houthi terrorist regime along Yemen's coastline. The airstrikes were described as a response to the repeated attacks by the Houthis against Israel, with surface-to-surface missiles and UAVs. Meanwhile, the Houthi-affiliated Al Masirah TV reported an American aggression targets with 6 strikes at the port of Hodeidah. The channel claimed that several sites were hit, including locations in the Bajil district of Hodeidah province, which lies along the Red Sea. But here's what's happening in Jerusalem, Israel. Hundreds of anti-government protesters holding a protest outside the Knesset building. This happened on Monday after Israeli authorities announced plans to seize the entire Gaza Strip the day before. Participants in the march said this was a direct threat to hostages still held by Hamas. The protesters marched from the Hodders Bridge to the Knesset complex, where the first weekly faction meetings were being held after the spring break. Israel's cabinet approved on Sunday a plan to expand the operation in the Gaza Strip, which includes expanding the territory under Israeli army control, denying Hamas members access to humanitarian aid, and launching massive strikes on militant command posts.
The only way to bring the hostages back is to end the war and make another agreement like the agreement that was already made and was broken, and not to continue with the war without a plan and without a purpose that can only kill both the hostages and many others in Gaza and in Israel. Really, only stay in power. That's the only motive for both him and Smotrich. In case of Smotrich, there are also all kinds of delusions about new settlements in Gaza, and which will only lead to the destruction of both Gaza and Israel.
It's terrible, but now they're telling the truth. They're telling the truth. They want to control Gaza. They don't care about the hostages. We know it all the time, but now they're finally saying that. They offered to take care of the Gaza, to build it again, to have people from Arab countries to rule the place, to end the war, to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, to have all our hostages back, and the Egyptian plan can work.
We're back in Europe as Russia says Ukraine launched a drone attack on Moscow days before the start of a ceasefire ordered by the Russian president himself to coincide with a World War II parade. Moscow's 4 major airports shut for a few hours today amid the barrage. Authorities said that there were no casualties and Ukraine has not commented. Moscow is due to hold a parade on May 9 to mark the victory of the Soviet Union and allies over Nazi Germany. This year is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. It will also see world leaders, including China's Xi Jinping, in Russia for the event. Putin has called for a 3-day ceasefire from May 8th, as something Ukraine is not committed to, but Kyiv wants a longer truce. President Volodymyr Zelensky has dismissed Russia's ceasefire plans as a theatrical play. Instead, he's been pushing for a ceasefire of at least 30 days, where there would be a halt to missile and drone strikes on civilian targets. But Russia intends to go ahead with its proposed 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine beginning on Thursday. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said if Ukraine violates a truce, it will be met with an appropriate response. Overnight, Ukrainian drone attacks on Moscow shut airports across the capital for several hours. Meanwhile, Russian strikes on Sumy and Odessa killed 4 people, while Russia says Ukraine killed 3 people on the Russian side of the border. Russia's ceasefire plan will coincide, as we said earlier, with a major parade in Moscow marking the victory in Europe in World War II. To the UK now, as the Home Office says visa applications from nationalities, thought most likely to overstay, and claim asylum in the UK could be restricted under a new government crackdown. It says people from countries such as Pakistan, Nigeria, and Sri Lanka may find it more difficult to come to the UK to work and study. Ministers believe there is a particular problem with those who come to the UK legally on work or study visas and then lodge a claim for asylum, which, if granted, would allow them stay in the country permanently. One Home Office official says our upcoming immigration white paper will set out a comprehensive plan to restore order to our broken immigration system. Now, it's not clear which nationalities are most likely to overstay their visas, as the Home Office has not published statistics on exit checks since 2020 due to review into the accuracy of the figures. Many exits from the UK can go unrecorded, meaning that those without a departure record were not necessarily still in the country. I want to bring in now immigration lawyer Dayo Fadino to help us understand this decision, which could take off any moment now. Dayo, thank you for joining us on the program. How do you understand this decision by the Home Office? I mean, they really doesn't sound like they have made up their minds yet what exactly it is. But what do you think? Would this mean that many visa applications will now be denied, especially in the countries that are listed, the countries that have been named?
Oh, good afternoon, Amarashi, and good afternoon to your viewers. In point of fact, this decision is quite a strange decision, if I should use that word strange. Strange in the sense that I'm not sure of how it's going to be working. How do you actually decide as to who should be granted a student visa or who should not be granted a student visa? And how would you be able to apply rules generally, rules to do with students' applications and rules to do with work permit applications? The rules are quite universal and quite, intact. And these rules apply to nearly every single country all over the world. So now, how do you then separate countries like Nigeria, Pakistan, or Sri Lanka from all other countries to at least apply these rules? I'm not sure of how it's going to be working. Going by what you just mentioned, of course, it seems that what they're going to be doing is they will be refusing so many applications coming from Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, and so many. We don't know the other countries that are going to be mentioned in the white paper in about a week's time or so. But the whole thing sounds quite bizarre, quite discriminatory, really. How it's going to be working, we do not know yet. But it's a very, very strange way of coming to a decision regarding student visas and work permit visas. I'm not sure how it's going to work, really.
Yeah, and it does kind of sound akin to being blacklisted by the UK government. I mean, if Nigeria is on this list, there is a problem here because of the relationship that exists between the two countries. That will definitely fray some nerves.
Indeed. Even if we are to use the word blacklisted, I think what the UK government is doing is not just blacklisting Nigeria and so many other countries. What they're doing is they're actually ostracizing a country like Nigeria. We belong to the Commonwealth, for crying out loud. And there've been so many students who have patronized the UK for so many years. Many of them do not claim asylum. I don't know where they actually got their figures from concerning claiming asylum after they finish studying or after a person has actually finished working or the work permit of that person has expired in the UK. So where they actually got their figures from, I don't know. It's more or less like trying to, stain the reputation of so many Nigerians regarding taking them to be some kind of people whose character is questionable. Hence the reason why we now need to refuse so many of this type of applications, because we believe that anytime you actually come to our country, you are going to be overstaying after your student visa. Again, it's unheard of, really. And why they should be doing this to a few countries, I don't know. It's totally, utterly wrong. They shouldn't be doing this at all.
Now, I understand immigration, it has been a challenge for the UK, but, you know, as an immigration lawyer yourself, what kind of problems are you foreseeing that the government will have with a decision like this?
I foresee so many problems and so many difficulties with this type of decision. First of all, how do you define likely to overstay in the UK? What countries do you now categorize as the nationals been likely to overstay in the UK? How do you define? How do you extrapolate and and come to the right statistics as to what countries would want to overstay in the UK and what countries would never want to actually overstay in the UK? How do you come to that kind of calculation or conclusion? The whole thing, this type of policy or decision taking, I could foresee so many legal challenges against the government concerning this type of decision and policy. The situation could be in breach of so many rules, discrimination rules and regulations. For a start, it would be totally against and totally in breach, and flouting the European Convention on Human Rights regulations under the Human Rights Act, that right not to be discriminated against, and the right to be able to at least, regard every single human being, whether you are from any country or not, whatever your nationality is or your social origin is. That rule actually states very clearly under the Human Rights Act that you cannot discriminate against anybody. And you would now, so when you then pass this type of regulation or rule into being, how do you now protect the rights of those kind of people? So I could see so many people actually challenging this type of decision because it's in breach of the Human Rights Act, definitely. And one other thing I think is also happening is the government is always, anytime they have a situation with being scared of immigration or asylum applications, they now start using immigration rules and asylum rules and regulations as a blunt instrument, a blunt, oppressive, attacking instrument against immigrants. Immigrants are not the main problem of this country. They should get their acts right and do what they need to do right. The policies the current Labour government is introducing to the UK to do with fuel, not actually giving them the allowance they need for their fuel, and trying to actually abolish PIP, personal independent payment, of which so many people are totally against. Hence the reason why they voted for Reform Party in the last local government elections. These are the issues. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with immigrants. So they should stop attacking immigrants and always using all these rules and new rules and regulations and decisions as blunt instruments to be able to at least, paint immigrants, totally, terrible in this country. They are not. And another situation is this. The applications to do with asylum applications, even if they now want to be making the case that the asylum applications are always very, horrible for the country, only a few applications or only a few immigrants actually use the asylum route to remain in the UK. The majority of applications, to do immigration applications, many of them are legal applicants and legal immigration, nothing whatsoever to do with asylum. The asylum applications, if that's what they are making the case all about, they are so insignificant compared to legal immigration of people actually coming into the UK. So they should stop using the asylum excuse to continue attacking innocent immigrants who also got the right to be able to remain in this country. They also have the right, they're human beings like any other person, and they got the human right to at least be able to remain in the UK.
You think that this could be the UK mirroring, the actions in the United States? Because there's also been a clampdown on immigrants, on people from other nationalities in the United States, revocation of visas, people just being picked up and being sent to different parts of the world and all of that. And do you think that this fear probably emanates from, seeing what's happening there, and then they thinking that, this is quite effective to solving some of the problems, the localized problems in the UK? I know that, countries tend to sort of copy each other, and I know that the UK and the US do have close relations and all of that. Prime Minister Keir Starmer was in Washington, amidst the whole global trade tariff, and he sort of buttered up the US president, didn't come fighting as most of the other countries did. Do you think that this could also maybe at the back of all of this could be a plan, I don't know, maybe to put the UK in good standing or good light with the US, or I don't know, what do you think?
Well, as far as the US is concerned, of course, we have the Trump government in the US right now. That government is, utterly, anti-immigrants in the US. And it's made it very, very clear that it's totally and utterly against immigrants, and it will be deporting as many of them as it can in the US. If you are to then apply that, if it's the case that UK politicians now want to, copy what's going on in the US, I think they'll be failing woefully in the UK. And I say this for this very particular reason. The UK is not the US. This kind of system being run in the US is totally different from what's run in the UK. Yes, the Reform Party, they always, jump on the bandwagon of immigration, and play to the gallery of so many people who they believe are totally and utterly against immigrants in this country, or people they perceive to be against immigrants in this country. Well, it's not going to work. It won't work in the UK because the UK is totally different from the US to do with the government of the UK. We in the UK, we run a parliamentary system, not the type of system whereby a president would not be accountable to for actions he takes in the US. Before any government would be able to at least run the kind of policies being run in the US, you would then have to have an absolute majority in parliament, and you would have to be scrutinized very heavily by the opposition in parliament for you to now say you want to run those kind of policies in the UK. So it's not just possible for those kind of things to happen in the UK. Yes, the Reform Party is on the rise. They feel that they are getting somewhere, but we should remember that presently they only have about 5 MPs amongst about 650 MPs. They could be popular, but if you do not have enough ground to be able to introduce the policies being run in the US, it's not going to be possible for you now to actually say you want to do what's happening in the US.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Of course, we'll be reaching out to the British High Commission here in Nigeria to find out if there will be a restriction on those visas. But thank you for kickstarting this conversation with us, Dayo Fadino.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
We're off on a short break on The World Today. Still ahead. Ecuador imposes mandatory face masks in schools due to the rise of whooping cough and yellow fever cases. Stay with us. You're still watching The World Today. Sudan's electricity provider says drone strikes have hit a major power station in the city of Port Sudan, causing a complete power outage. Explosions and huge fires have been reported near the city's main international airport as a paramilitary force targeted the key city for the third consecutive day. Reports say flights have been cancelled after drones hit the international airport and a hotel near the current presidential palace. Thick black smoke could be seen at dawn on the skyline of the previously safe city, where thousands of people fled the two-year civil war have sought refuge. Earlier today, Sudan's electricity company said it was assessing the damage on its substation, which has disrupted supply of water, health and other services. The United Nations Children's Fund is warning that the food and nutrition crisis in Nigeria might deepen as the country now has the highest number of malnourished children in Africa and the second highest in the world. According to Nimat Hajiboy, Chief of Nutrition at UNICEF, 600,000 children in Nigeria are suffering from acute malnutrition. Half of them are at risk of developing severe acute malnutrition. She gave the warning during a media briefing on the 2025 lean season multi-sectoral response plan for Borno, Adamawa and Yobe states. The briefing, organized by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, is aimed at mobilizing funding and support for humanitarian response in the northern region. Well, my colleague Joke Rogers discussed the issue with Professor of Community Nutrition at the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, in Ogun State, Professor Wasiu Afolabi.
Right. So would you agree that this is a grim milestone for Nigeria, having the highest malnutrition rate in Africa and the second highest in the world?
Well, thank you very much. That statistics or statement is not new. I think for quite over 5 years, or even the last 1 decade, Nigeria has been a country with the highest number of malnourished children, particularly stunted children, and second only to India. You know, in the global burden of malnutrition, and this is very, very sad. You know, for a country that has all the resources, both human and material resources that Nigeria has, I mean, we don't have business having this kind of, statistics. That is a burden for the whole of Africa, and then globally. It's really very sad, you know, that it is this kind of negative news that we get to hear about our country, particularly with regard to malnutrition that affects both children and women alike.
Right, and for these 3 states, Borno, Adamawa and Yobe, all in the northeast, what are the primary factors contributing to the high rates of malnutrition among children in Nigeria?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Those states that you mentioned are the hotspot states in the country. And the driving factors have been, you know, the issue of banditry, issues around climate change, issues around insecurity, farmers, herders clash all over the place that has driven people out of their home. If you look at it, I think in the past 5 to 10 years now, Nigeria has faced a lot of banditry and insecurity around those northern states. And this has affected people's livelihood, the ability to farm, to produce their own food, to earn a livelihood, and it has also led to emergency situation where people have to be displaced from their ancestral homes, where they grow their crops and nurture their children. So this is really a problem, and it has actually affected, the production and the productivity of the people, and when this happens, women and children will be the worst hit. And that is why we have this kind of a problem, bedeviling those hotspot states that you mentioned. The classical signs of malnutrition that were described during the Civil War they are rearing their heads. In fact, they have reared their heads, and the number of children that are suffering from severe acute malnutrition is increasing on a daily basis in those states, and it calls for a serious concern.
Right, and in addressing this food-related problem, are there effective strategies in ending malnutrition that we're not looking at, or we're just not there yet?
Well, there are low-cost, high-effective strategies for addressing this malnutrition. The essential nutrition actions, which includes breastfeeding practices, particularly excludes breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life, followed by appropriate complementary feeding and the continued feeding, as well as micronutrient supplementation for both mothers and children, are very, very key, and they are very, very important. Interestingly, in the first 1,000 days of life of a child, that is from conception until the child's second birthday, nutritional insults suffered by children at that period can never be regained. And so it is very important that we direct our efforts, towards, implementing strategies that will ensure the safety of mothers when they are pregnant, as well as the nutrition of the unborn child, until when the child is delivered and the child is 2 years. These are the areas where we need to, concentrate our effort on. Interestingly, it's not as if government is not doing anything. Government has been funding, nutrition services across health facilities, particularly primary health care facilities, but the coverage has been very low. And interestingly, those who also don't have the opportunity of coming to health facilities will be left out unless we have community outreaches, where some of these services can be taken to the people in situ, in their locations. I mean, if this is done, these strategies, these nutrition services are proven. There are evidences that they will work and they reverse the malnutrition among children. For example, children that have severe acute malnutrition need to be given treatment, particularly through the use of ready-to-eat therapeutic foods, which are also sometimes not available and does not reach those who require them. So these are the problems. There are strategies that can work if they are well delivered.
Right, and what are those key nutrients that are often missing from a child that's malnourished?
Well, most importantly, a child that is malnourished is suffering from inadequate calories as well as protein, which are very, very important. Then apart from these macronutrients, we also have micronutrients, particularly iron, folic acid, zinc. These are very, very important. And of course, calcium. These are very, very important for the growth of the child. And once malnutrition sets in, it's not just only one nutrient that will be affected, because there are interactions between all these nutrients. And so when one is affected, inadvertently is also going to affect the other. So these are all the macronutrients, particularly, adequate calorie, protein, and fat, as well as micronutrients such as iron, zinc, iodine, and folic acid, are all very, very important and key, as well as calcium. So once these are deficient, then the child will not thrive, the child will not grow, and the child may also not survive if care is not taken.
My colleague Joker Rogers with Professor of Nutrition at the Federal University of Agriculture in Abeokuta, Professor Wasiu Afolabi. Our health matters still in Ecuador now, as the Ministry of Education, in coordination with the Ministry of Public Health, has made mandatory the use of face masks in schools located in the most densely populated areas due to the rise in whooping cough and yellow fever cases. Students and teachers of Vicente Recufuerte National School in Guayaquil have been wearing face masks as a measure to counteract the recent increase in cases of whooping cough and yellow fever. Parents concerned about the situation have chosen to reintroduce some of the hygiene practices used previously during the COVID-19 pandemic. The epidemiological alert issued by the authorities, which will remain in effect for 60 days, will apply to the coastal provinces of Manabí, Santo Domingo, and Gayas, as well as to Pichincha, in the highlands, whose capital is Quito, according to the Ministry of Education. Now, most of the cases of whooping cough and yellow fever have been identified in these regions, in addition to cases of leptospirosis in the Amazon, which has claimed the lives of 8 children. In response, the health authorities are urging the population to visit their nearest vaccination centers, stressing that children under the age of 7 are most vulnerable. And in other news, the Peruvian government has imposed a nighttime curfew in Patas province, where 13 kidnapped mine workers were killed last week. President Dina Boluarte also ordered that mining activities be suspended for a month while extra police and soldiers are deployed to the region. The incident has shown a spotlight on the activities of criminal gangs in Patas. La Pedrosa, the Peruvian company which owns the gold mine at which the men worked, said they'd been kidnapped by illegal miners colluding with criminals on April 26. Their bodies were found on Sunday. President Boluarte said the armed forces would take full control of La Poderosa in the mining area. The mining area authorities said in a statement 39 people with links to the company had been killed by criminal gangs in Patas, a mining region more than 800 kilometers north of the capital, Lima. India has initiated plans to stop water flow into Pakistan by reducing water flow from the Baghalir Dam located on the Chenab River before following similar steps for the Kinshaganga Dam in Jhelum River. This footage was recorded on Monday, shows the reduced water flow from the Baghalir Dam into the Chenab River below. The Chenab and Jhelum rivers are 2 of the 3 western rivers allocated to Pakistan under the 1960 Indus Water Treaty, which prohibits altering the flow of water that may harm access to water. Tensions erupted between the 2 nuclear-armed neighbors after 26 people were killed, many of them foreign tourists, in an attack that took place in the Indian-administered Kashmir on April 22nd. Delhi has accused Pakistan of being involved, which Islamabad has repeatedly denied. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi warned that the Kashmir attackers would be pursued to the ends of the earth, while India closed its main border with Pakistan and suspended a visa exemption scheme and the landmark Indus Water Treaty on water sharing. Pakistan said attempts to stop or divert water would be considered an act of war. Last week, the defense minister claimed a military incursion by India was imminent, while Railway Minister Hanif Abbasi warned that its 130 nukes are not for show, but are aimed towards India. Or mediating in the crisis between the 2 countries, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stressed the futility of a military solution. He was addressing reporters at the UN headquarters in New York.
Tensions between India and Pakistan are at their highest in years. I deeply respect and I am profoundly grateful to the government of people of both countries and their significant contributions to the work of the United Nations, not least UN peacekeeping. And so it pains me to see relations reaching a boiling point. I understand the raw feelings following the awful terror attack in Pahalgam on 22 April. I once again strongly condemn that attack and extend my condolences to the families of the victims. Targeting civilians is unacceptable, and those responsible must be brought to justice through credible lawful means. It is also essential, especially at this critical hour, to avoid a military confrontation that could easily spin out of control. Now is the time for maximum restraint and stepping back from the brink. That has been my message in my ongoing outreach with both countries. Make no mistake, a military solution is no solution. And I offer my good offices to both governments in the service of peace. The United Nations stands ready to support any initiative that promotes de-escalation, diplomacy, and the renewed commitment to peace.
When we return after this next break, The world's highest bridge getting final touches in China's Guizhou. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has expressed hopes that the United States justice system will rule in favor of Michaelis Espinosa, a 2-year-old child separated from her mother, Yorli Bernal, before boarding a deportation flight from the United States. While Yorli was deported to Venezuela, Michaelis remained in the United States, a move Nicolas Maduro's government describes as kidnapping. He wants Yorli's parental rights to be recognized. He was making the statement during a televised speech in Caracas during a television show organized just for him. The Venezuelan president said he hopes international pressure, including from the U.S. citizens, will ensure that Michaelis' case does not go unpunished and that she can reunite with her mother in Venezuela. Well, back in the United States, lawmakers from across the political divide did clash over Trump's plans to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. White House Rules Committee Chairwoman Virginia Fox said the necessary renaming made by the president did not end the world, nor did it cause any harm to the American people. Many lawmakers slammed the policy as a waste of taxpayer dollars and a chance to enrich the family fortunes of the Trump government. The House Rules Committee decided along party lines to send the Gulf of America Act, proposed by Republican President Marjorie Taylor Greene, to the full House floor for a vote later this week.
Numbers of times and H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act, renames the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America and directs federal agencies to update their documents and maps accordingly to incorporate the new name. This legislation codifies President Trump's actions to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. In short, this legislation recognizes the strategic influence America has over this geography, not to mention the existing economic, cultural, and commercial might that we passively exert on the Gulf.
This bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico is a stupid, unserious waste of time and taxpayer dollars. It's an embarrassment to the nation that it was ever introduced, let alone that it's being brought to the floor for a vote. We don't want a country where decisions are made by tweet or cable news interviews, and we definitely don't want Congress to waste its time on nonsense like this. It's a disgrace to our history and our country's legacy for Congress to spend another second of legislative time groveling in this way. I urge my colleagues to find the courage to dispense with this bill and bills like it before we do more damage to this institution. As was mentioned, the Gulf of Mexico was so named over 500 years ago. If we want to update that name to reflect our current American culture, maybe we should rename it the Sea of Emoluments.
We are proud of our accomplishments, our history, and our future. It is nearly impossible to overstate the Gulf of America's critical role in achieving not only American energy independence, but dominance. President Trump has made it a priority of his administration to reassert America's role as a global leader in energy production, and the Gulf of America is a critical part of that agenda. There are many, many reasons why we would want to clarify and correct what's probably been a historical anomaly in terms of the name of this particular body of water. So I think it makes perfect sense to actually name this the Gulf of America and move on so that we can address some of the other things that are important to our constituents as well.
It is one day to the beginning of the conclave in the Vatican, the start of elections for the next Pope who will take over from the late Pope Francis, who was buried nearly 2 weeks ago. April 21st was when Pope Francis was buried. 133 cardinal electors are up at the Vatican in the conclave. Will decide a new leader for the world's 1.4 billion Catholics after holding their last pre-conclave meeting, which happens today. Cardinals who will elect the next pope have less than a day to weigh their final considerations before effectively going into lockdown and casting their vote. Cardinals have met in the past 2 days to discuss various challenges in the world and in the church to underline the qualities they believe the new pope ought to have in response to the challenges. He's 99 years old, but he's still really strong and his message strong as well. Talking about Sir David Attenborough, who's launching what he says is one of the most important films of his career as he enters his 100th year. Sir Attenborough believes his new cinema-length film, Ocean, could play a decisive role in saving biodiversity and protecting the planet from climate change. He says after almost 100 years, he now understands the most important place on Earth is not on land, but at sea. A blue carpet will be rolled out at the film's premiere at the Royal Festival Hall in London. While the annual reenactment of the famous Battle of Puebla took place in the neighborhood of Peñón de los Baños in Mexico City, a battle occurred in the state on May 5, 1862, where a group of indigenous Tlacapuactales fought the defeated French army that invaded the country at the time. This parade is followed by several bands accompanied the procession, which took place yesterday. During the celebration on May 5, people took to the streets from 8 a.m. at the Mexico City International Airport to walk through much of the neighborhood dressed in costumes representing the French soldiers and the indigenous people, also known in the U.S. as Cinco de Mayo, May 5. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.